Hi everybody, welcome back to lecture 8, and today we look at Romans 11 and 12. Now in this particular lecture we're going to look at the third and the final chapter of those 3 chapters dealing with the Jewish question. Where do the Jews, especially that big group who didn't accept Jesus, fit into the grand scheme of salvation history? What's God's plan for the Jewish people? This chapter, chapter 11, closes the more theological part of the letter to the Romans, which has been our concern right up until this moment. We looked at the sad plight of fallen humanity and at how we are brought into righteousness before God, into God's friendship. And we're brought there by faith. Faith in what Jesus has done for us. It's our faith in God that brings us into salvation, which, whether we be Jewish or Gentile. And the second chapter of today, chapter 12, begins the second part of the letter to the Romans. We begin to discuss the implications of faith for how we live our daily life. And the framework for that is a framework of trying to encourage us and inspire us to be good Christians. So this lecture falls into 2 main sections. The first, chapter 11, the extraordinary place the Jewish people have in God's plan of salvation. The second part is chapter 12, living in community and relationship with those outside our community. So first part is chapter 11, the extraordinary place of Judaism in the plan, God's plan of salvation. Now we're going to go through 4 steps in this chapter. The first step, God has not rejected Israel at all because a remnant is faithful. Paul begins his argument by insisting on his own pedigree as a good Jewish person. And he uses 3 honorific religious titles. I myself am an Israelite. Remember, Israel is the religious name for the Jewish people. I am a descendant of Abraham. And Abraham, of course, is the man of faith par excellence. And I am a member of the tribe of Benjamin. And Benjamin is the most religious of the tribes, and Benjamin is called the beloved one of God, the beloved one of the Lord, in Deuteronomy chapter 33. Paul then uses the example of Elijah, that extraordinary prophet who defeated the prophets of Baal, but who was subsequently hounded by that infamous Queen Jezebel, who was furious at what he'd done. Elijah escapes into the desert, a broken, dispirited man, and cries out to the Lord, Lord, they have killed your prophets, they've demolished your altars, and I alone am left, and they seek my life. Bishop Tom Wright suggests that Paul might feel a bit like Yahweh, like Elijah at this moment. He's worked so hard for his fellow believers, but they haven't accepted his message. So he feels isolated and a bit of a failure. What on earth is God doing? An answer begins with the idea of a remnant. There is a small faithful group of Jews who survived the general Jewish rejection of Jesus. And they are of immense significance. Just as God told there was a remnant of 7,000 faithful Jews in the Israel of Elijah's day, so now there's a remnant in the day of Paul. The whole idea of a faithful remnant is a very Jewish idea, and it emerges in the context of the political crisis that the northern kingdom found itself in, and then the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom, of course, had the Assyrians encircling it, and the southern kingdom had the Babylonians. They're going to survive the capture of the north and the capture of the south. This remnant will survive. In Isaiah chapter 10, that day the remnant of Israel and the survivors of the house of Jacob will stop relying on the man who strikes and will truly rely on Yahweh, the Holy One of Israel. Isaiah chapter 37. The surviving remnant of the house of Judah shall bring forth new shoots below and fruits above. For a remnant shall go out from Jerusalem and survivors from Mount Zion. The jealous love of Yahweh Sabaoth will accomplish it all. As Bishop Tom Wright comments on this, what happened in the exile in Babylon, most Israelites were exiled forever, a few returned and started again, is now happening to the Jewish people as they come through the greatest crisis of all, the life, the death and the resurrection of their Messiah. This remnant is the work of God's grace. And Paul reminds us of this. By grace, you notice, nothing therefore to do with good works, or grace would not be grace at all. That's how it happens. Paul then says that all those other Jews outside the remnant were given a sluggish spirit, unseeing eyes and unattentive ears by the Lord. That's a quotation from Deuteronomy chapter 29 verse 4, which describe the Jewish people who didn't grasp what God had done at the Exodus. Secondly, Israel's rejection is really a stumbling block, but it's there for a grand purpose. We now hear that Israel's failure to accept Jesus isn't really falling completely down, falling over, but it's a stumble. It's not as though they have definitively moved away from God's path. Rather, there's a temporary lapse in it all, which God will use for God's greater purposes. And we quote Paul, their fall has saved the pagans. Think of the extent to which the world, the pagan world, has benefited from their fall. In other words, it was the stumbling of the Jews which allowed the pagans into salvation. Now Paul says that the reason that he was sent as an apostle to the Gentiles was to make my own people envious of you pagans, and in this way save some of them. He's suggesting that the gospel success among the pagans is going to provoke some sort of jealousy amongst the Jewish people, which would lead them to reevaluate who this Jesus of Nazareth truly is. And that'll lead them to a change of heart and to accepting the gospel. Jesus must have been the Messiah, they're going to say. Look at his appeal to the whole world. Look at what he's done for the Gentiles. Brendan Byrne also makes the point that the Jerusalem Jews would certainly be very impressed by this Paul and his concern for the Jewish Christian community in taking up a large collection and bringing that to their help. There was much to impress the Jewish people in what was happening in these communities established by Paul. And now he uses two images to illustrate this profound hope that the Jewish people would be saved in the end. The first is, well, from the liturgy, from the sacrifice offered at harvest time. If you offer to God the first fruits of the crop, then this sense of being